One.
What's good? What's good? I think we're started. Um, I don't know if Rocky can hear me, if we can talk back and forth. But yeah, my name is Old Ghost. I'm from the People's Revolution. Also, uh, personal trainer, wellness coach. Done a lot of work within the communities. Even held my own school for several years, teaching early childhood education to 1.5 to 5-year-olds. And when Rocky got at me and asked me to do a series, I explained to him that one of the things that I really wanted to focus my attention and efforts towards was the language of life and the alchemy of self. The alchemy of self pertains to the three different parts of the components of the human being, experiencing a spiritual being, experiencing a human experience, and being part one being the mind and the soul, the spirit. Part two is the body, and part three is our existence within this realm. Part one being the mind, and really the kind of the language of life and the alchemy of self is that, a lot of the things that we believe and that we perceive within this realm is based within the language and the understanding that we have gained and also been indoctrinated into over our whole life period. A lot of the things that we end up experiencing, a lot of things we think, our emotions, our presets, our triggers, our relationships, um, how we address jobs, how we address society, how we address one another is all within this construct of how we adapt our perception of life and through the language of life. And a lot of this goes into being able to recognize And that's what I kind of want to delve into first, is being able to recognize within you, what is your language, what is your programming, how does your language dictate your perception on reality, and vice versa. And a good way of being able to do this is, and a good exercise with doing this, is just being able to like stop for a moment and then just think and to yourself silently, and think about yourself and think about the language that surrounds the description that you give yourself, the way that you address yourself and how you address yourself. And then you identify the words that you use to identify self. And so, an example of this is me. For years, I suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. I suffered from anxiety. I suffered from abandonment issues. I had suffered from depression. I had suffered from compulsive impulses. I had suffered from a lot. And a lot of it was because the way that the wiring within my mind worked created a narrative within my mind. And a lot of that narrative, or that self-narrative that I had given myself, and that also life and others within life had given me, was that of a negative. And I always saw myself in a way of that I was a destructive force, I was a monster, I wasn't good enough, and I had a lack of self-value and a self-evaluation that was always negative. And again, that's the language that we use to try to identify with ourselves within this world. And usually the language that we're using to identify within ourselves within this world is based on outward interpretations of ourselves. And so a lot of the work for me began in recognizing and identifying those words that I used that limited my perception of my reality. And one that runs really concurrent with people of color and the quote unquote minorities, which I don't identify with that label either, because I feel like that's an evaluation and a value-placed system, a word that they use to place a value on another human being or to devalue another human being. But one of the words that I used was poor. And I even had this situation, I won't get into the organizations or anything, but I had a group of people come up to me once and ask me to work with them. And the association of the organization, they used a word that was very similar, and it was, to reflect the nature of our plight and our struggle. But for me, it really identified with the realization that for so long our people had been trained into believing that they were something less than what they really were, or that they perceived themselves in the nature of lack, or they perceived themselves in the nature of poor, or they perceived themselves in the nature of the philosophy of poverty. And therefore, everything that they determined about their existence was based within this reality of the limits of those words and the parameter of those words. And so for me, and especially becoming from somebody who came from a background that I didn't have financial literacy, right? I didn't have that reinforcement of the understanding of how to build wealth and save and do all these other things. So reinforcing that with the idea that I also came from a mindset of poverty, my narrative, the silent talks or discussions that I had were very much within the nature of that. And so therefore, I started to create my reality based within the idea of lack, or my reality based within the idea of poor or poverty. And the truth being, and see, this is where we can start to kind of practice and see where we are within our own mental constructs and in our own development, and how we perceive ourselves and what words we use to be able to establish how we perceive ourselves. And so what I started to do was I started looking at a lot of like the opposites of these words, right? So if your mindset is in lack, then the opposite of lack is abundance. And if your mindset is in poor, then the opposite of poor is in rich. Or if your mindset is in poverty or any of these other things, right? We always can look at and see that there's another opposing or another opposite to that word that means something completely different, and it no longer puts the limits and the parameters on you, right? And the reason why this is important, because what most of us don't understand is that most of us respond off of a triggered condition instead of a calculated response. And the reason why is because throughout our lives, we have these circumstances that appear, and especially when we're younger and there's a development stage from the early ages of adolescence, and we start to experience things. And if there's anything really traumatic that happens within that period, it automatically writes into your programming. And in that programming, there's a subset of triggers within your subconscious that when something that even remotely relates to that traumatic experience that happened when you were younger happens, it causes a triggered response, even decades down the line, years down the line. And that triggered response is written with a language, and that language is written with a code. And that code is either to limit your understanding of true self or to expand the realm of your understanding of your true self. And one of the things I always tell my clients is this: you have to understand that challenge initiates greatness. So beyond the realm of your challenges is right where your greatness exists, where your triumph exists, where your victories exist. But for so many of us, because the programming that we use to associate our existence with and the words we use are so limiting, we never get beyond that threshold because of that fact. And again, like, I use my own personal experiences to be able to relate to most of this because of the fact that I saw how, one, for so long I had in a way dumbed down the knowledge of self and the nature of true self. And not because I was ignorant to a higher understanding, or I was ignorant to, the language of religion or faith or all these other things, but because simply I didn't understand that the words that I was using were either empowering or they were devaluing my essence as a whole. I didn't understand that there was a spell component behind words in and of themselves. And even more so, I didn't understand that the most detrimental words that I would ever speak to myself would be spoken in silence and written. And so in a lot of ways, I found myself struggling because the programming that had been preset or that I was dealing with had me at a place where I was always constantly looking at myself and viewing myself in a lower form, in a lower vibrational energy. And I think that's important to talk about, because if we're going to talk about language in the first place and what the language of life really truly is, the language of life is the ability to vibrate from oneself's core self and utilizing language and the harmonics and the words and everything else to be able to draw out from you an intended energy to create an atmosphere around you. And it's even been said that, like, when you tune into your heart and we really get into the balance of the heart, we can actually create a field of energy around us that can be felt for up to 3 meters. So there is scientific data and proof that states that we have the ability that once we go into ourselves and really draw out of ourselves the true essence of self, that we can even change the atmosphere around us. But that begins with, and always will start with, where you are with the words, where you are with your language that you use to, and the narrative that you use to create your true self, or your true understanding of self, or your true understanding of reality. And so, and another way of being able to do this too, and to look at this and see the impact of it, is to look at any person, whether it was a grandparent or a parent or a loved one or a sibling or somebody you had a relationship with, or whoever, that at some point in time when they told you they loved you and you really truly knew it to be 100%, that in that moment you felt an elation within your heart, and as if your heart had grown, because in essence your spirit does grow when there's an understanding, when there's compassion, when there's love, when there's nurturement, when there's kindness, when there's empathy, when there's love, unconditional love being poured out into you. You do feel something, and that vibrational energy that gets created from that moment then emanates out of it. Now the key is to try to understand, how do we expand on that moment? And not so that we just have those moments when somebody tells us they love us, or we get an affirmation of something in life, or any of those things, right? But more so, how do we expand on that moment in everyday living? And also, how do we expand that moment through our language, through our self-narrative, through what we use? And so a lot of, like, the things that you'll end up doing when you're really trying to focus on these exercises especially, is you'll look at these words. And each one of these words will kind of dictate to you where you are at in your process of ascension, in your process of true understanding of self. And so again, like when you use words like lack or poverty or poor or impoverished or downtrodden or any of these other things, like, we are identifying with something that automatically creates a parameter and creates a place for where you can only go so far within that limited understanding. And what we want to do is push ourselves into the zone of an infinite potential. So we live in this world that is really kind of filled with complexities, and especially when you talk about language in and of itself. I mean, we live in a world where there's hundreds of languages spoken in different tongues, where media and advertisement and social media and propaganda and governments and all kinds of other things use language to manipulate the mental construct to create a desired reaction. And so it's really hard when we are bombarded on such a regular basis with and inundated with so much language that is so limiting, to be able to then push ourselves beyond that and see the true essence and the true magic and intent of language within itself, and which is to create life. So the language of life isn't just simply me speaking the language of life, it's me speaking life into the language. Speaking life into myself, speaking life into someone else. So when I address myself, I'm not addressing myself with limited formed language, like I'm broken or sinful or hurt or lost or again poor or all of these other things. I don't speak to myself with those titles that limit my parameter for being able to understand myself. I speak to myself in terms that are relative to the nature of my true self, which is I am infinite, I am serene, I am eternal, I am powerful, I am love, I am light, I am consistent with all things within creation. And therefore, the very thing that spoke me into existence gave me the power to be able to then recreate things into existence with that same nature. Then I have that ability within myself. But again, it all comes from and stems from that ability to be able to speak into yourself life, speak into yourself eternity, speak into yourself in an infinite nature, speak into yourself abundance, speak into yourself unlimitedness. Because then you start to see that what really was going on for so long is that through your circumstances and through situations that arose in your life, you had identified, you had created a program and through language that identified you within a certain parameter. And that if you didn't at some point in time come in and start to change that program, and you were always going to run concurrent with it. Because the reason is this: when we have something that happens to us in our lives, like I said, going back a minute ago, we have something that happens to you in your life in a circumstance that, right? It's a traumatic experience. Within that traumatic experience, a programming gets written. And again, within that programming that gets written, a tone for which you believe or you perceive of yourself also gets spoken into it and written into it. Then you start repeating that over and over again. And again, it's all silent things that we do within our subconscious. Half the time, we don't even understand the programming that we're writing, and we don't understand how circumstances are writing into effect programming into us. So what ends up happening is that a traumatic experience ends up happening, and it writes into your subconscious of programming. Within that programming, then it develops a reaction. That reaction and that response, once repeated, becomes a pattern. That pattern then, once repeated, becomes the personality of the person. So a lot of the times what happens is people who fall into a state of victimhoodness is because something happened at some period, at some time, wrote into them the programming. And then if anything happened that reflected the nature of that programming at any point, it repeated that and then gave validity to that. And then it just kept doing that until that becomes that person's personality. So no longer can they see themselves as a victor because they've repeated the pattern of victimhood so many times that it's taken root and shape and form within them, and it's a part of their emotional output, the energy output that they put. So a lot of the things that we have to then go back and do is to rework that program. And it's like the idea, if you get a computer and you take that computer out of the box, right? And I take this computer and I go on and I get on some site and I get a virus on this computer. And then all of a sudden, this brand new computer that should have functioned and perfectly worked just fine because of its program, because of how it was written, now it doesn't function the same way. And the reason being is because we've now taken that program and we've rewritten the program. So what do? You go back in and you take out all of that programming, you rewrite that programming. so that that computer now functions. But the problem for most human beings is, one, we're not computers like that. And then two, nobody comes along and teaches us how to be able to identify the language that we use that is not of life, but the language that is of death, or the language that's whatever word you want to do to associate with the opposite of what the language of life does for us. And the problem is that most people are never told what their true nature is. You know, and that's really where the root of it comes from, because when a person naturally understands their existence and understands the true nature of themselves and not questions it at any point in time, that person goes through their life with a set program where they don't feel limited. They don't feel like they don't have the ability to be able to reach and obtain the things that they want to, because the nature of themselves isn't limited. The nature of themselves really is truly unlimited. But for most people, and especially people who come from low income situations or circumstances or things of that nature, what ends up happening is they don't get a chance to understand that sense of self, because no one comes along and tells them anything different. Like, I remember one of my clients asked me once, like, why do you call everybody kings and queens? And I said, you know, imagine that you spent most of your life hearing one thing about yourself. And it could have been anything. But imagine that you spend most of your life hearing one thing about yourself, and it's not positive, it's not good, it's not uplifting, it's not, you know, compelling you to become greater, right? And imagine that someday, sometime, some point, somebody comes along and they says something totally different, and they speak something into you. They speak something into your heart and into your being that actually reverberates, that actually reflects the true essence of who you are. And then when they speak that into you, it reminds you of the nature of your true self. Now imagine that, right? Imagine, it doesn't matter what time of the person's life that comes along, but imagine that a person spends a good deal of their life perceiving themselves in one nature until somebody comes along and opens up their eyes to show them their true self in a completely different nature. Now, what do you think that person's going to do? Now, regardless, if you take the steps, if you change your life, if you do whatever we want, right, from that point, and even if you don't, the onset of that knowledge that then is there and then is imparted in that person then becomes a part of the dialogue of that person intrinsically within them for the rest of their life. You know, it's like you can't close the book on something like that. You know, once it's written on your heart, it's written on your heart. So then it becomes a process of having to repeat steps and doing things over and over again until that thing that's been imparted starts to take root and shape and form and then grows into something greater within you. But again, that all comes from the language. And, you know, and I remember once I described it to some students that I was teaching, and I said, you know, I always viewed hip hop in a way as if it was like spell casting or sorcery in a way, because in a way it sort of is. But then again, so is all music forms, so is all forms of speech. And I said that, you know, whatever words that you were putting out were creating a desired effect, no matter what. And we can think of any song we want, we can take any artist we want, we can think of anything in the world that's ever been written, and you will see an intended effect for what was being written to create a stimuli within somebody, a response within them, right? So in many ways, a lot of people, when they're dealing with their inner selves, they have the same type of conversation within themselves where they're creating an intended narrative within their mind, and their body actually responds to that intended narrative within their mind. Reason being is because once it becomes a conditioned response within you, your body conditions a response to that stimuli. Meaning that if, you know, you think a certain way about yourself, your body creates a stimuli within you to the response of that thought. Because at all times, they're working in collaboration with each other. Because that's the alchemy of self. You know, in regards to the language of life. You know, when we talk about the alchemy of self, again, the alchemy of self has a few different parts, one being the mind, the other being the body, the other being the spirit in this realm, right? And all of this is within this realm and how it operates within this realm. But the alchemy itself, with the language of life, goes into how do we take the application of recreating the mental construct around the words that we use that create a stimuli within ourselves, and then reprogram not only the mind, but also the body and the body's response to it. You know, again, like a lot of things that end up happening to people because of diseases goes into their body being and their mind being at disease. And therefore, they create within themselves the circumstances because the language that they use, the vibrational, the harmonic frequency within their selves that they use to identify themselves is at a lower state. Therefore, it lowers everything, including the immune system. But a spirit-minded body that is in harmonic balance with itself and homeostasis with themselves actually draws up and drives up the immune system. So even through the language of life that we use to choose to speak within ourselves in silent, we can even change our immune system. We can change the way our body responds to itself and reacts. And again, a lot of this is hard. It's hard at first because the concepts seem almost foreign to almost everything else we've been taught about language and about self-identification, self-realization, and self-actualization, and the alchemy of self. But the reality is that it's absolutely intrinsic and it's divine in almost every aspect of the laws of nature. It actually corresponds with the laws of nature. In fact, you can see it in things like when you speak to plants or you sing to plants, right? And they've done studies on this that's shown that plants that were sung to or spoken to gently actually grew and responded different ways and thrived because of it. And I remember I heard this story once about an African tribe that when somebody did something wrong in this tribe, they would take this person and they put him in the village, in the center of the village, and then everybody from the village would come along and they would form a circle around this person. And everybody would speak a positive affirmation, something positive about that person into that person. And one of the things when I first heard this and I thought about it, I was like, wow, first of all, we don't even get close to doing anything like that here. You do anything wrong whatsoever, you can be publicly shamed, humiliated, drugged through the water, just anything and everything. We're really savage in our approach of being empathetic towards people, but yet then we express these forms of empathy in other really dramatic ways. So it's this, you know, this dichotomy that exists within this culture of how we address compassion and express compassion towards one another. But yet in this tribe, whether it be a parable or not, this is how it was, how the story was read when I read it. The thing that they said though is that through that act of compassion of speaking life into the other person, they saw a change in those people every single time. And I thought about that, what that meant to people who long for change, right? And long for the opportunity to be able to have and something impact them in a way that it creates the change within them that they desire for themselves. But so many people, we desire that to come from somewhere else. We desire that to come from someone else. For a lot of what I had experienced in my own life and what I was going through, I had always sought out personal relationships, especially with women, to affirm something that had been lacking in me because I was a child who was abandoned. I was a child who went through the foster system. I was a child who was beaten and molested and had dogs sicked on me and wasn't fed at times, and even all the way leading up to being in group homes, being raped when I was 12 years old, and all kinds of other things. So a lot of the language, and at a very young age for me, a lot of the language that I used to determine my reality was based around so many constraining things, so many suffocating thoughts that even before I was in my 20s, I was already struggling with like thoughts of suicide and having such a negative self-image and worth of myself that I didn't see a value in myself. And it didn't really even come until years later where I, you know, especially once I had my daughter, where I started to understand that everything that had happened was in accordance to an allowance for my soul to be able to come into the nature of true self. But in order to understand the nature of true self, I had to speak to the nature of true self in every way, shape, or form. So that meant going in and undoing all of this programming that had been written into effect, the abandonment, the sexual abuse, the homelessness, the PTSD, the depression, all of that. I had to rewrite the narrative on all those things. I had to take those things and I had to extrapolate them from the essence of true self and remove those things from the narrative, the essence of the true self, because I was limiting the narrative of the essence of my true self by utilizing these words. And again, these words were only really representations of circumstances that created an emotional trigger within me that had then, as time went on and been repeated, became a pattern, and that pattern took root and shape and form and became a habit. That habit became my personality, right? So it was only because of those things, having that time to be able to exist, and that narrative and those words being able to be repeated, right? And so really what it became about then was, okay, so how do you change all of that? How do you impact yourself on a DNA level, on a molecular level, through the words that you use to identify yourself? How do you get in and rework and rewire and reconfigure all of the programming that has been done throughout your life and do it in a way to where it creates a capacity of understanding within you to become greater? And not just greater, but to actually be the true image of yourself, which is also why I think sometimes reevaluating even use words like I'm becoming. You're not becoming anything. You always were. That's the knowledge of self, is to know that you were always that, of that essence. But again, a lot of that gets lost because of the languages that gets used to try to describe what you believe of yourself. So I don't know where everybody is right now on this. I know a couple of people have dropped a couple comments. So we'd definitely love to say what up to Brandy out there. Hi. And my man, Christian Courage. Good to see you guys on here with me. My man, Rocky and Natalie, who I love and appreciate very dearly, who gave me this opportunity to work with you guys on doing this. One thing I definitely want to take the time to be able to do is, like, I can field any questions that anybody wants or that has in regards to, again, the alchemy of self, which is the practice of the three different principles of the being, of this inhabited being, and how it pertains to the things within this world, but also, again, with the language of life and how it pertains to the reconstruction of the mental construct and reprogramming of the mind. One of the things I definitely would like to do is, there's an exercise that I've been doing for a really long time, and it's a practice that I use constant throughout all of my days. And the reason why is because it helps me to center myself and bring myself back into within myself, and to be able to listen into my divine truth, into my divine source. And in being able to do that, I have been able to which is, I do want to say, because it's interesting. I had this talk with my brother the other day when we were discussing self-mastery and the practice of the alchemy of self. My older brother, Mark, and me have been doing a lot of work in this for a while. And, I told him, man, because he was expressing the frustration with having to go through things continuously that he feels like he's kind of moved beyond. But I was expressing to him that I was like, just because you're trying to move beyond, or because one doesn't make any of this easier, it doesn't mean that it becomes easier. Because it doesn't become easier, it becomes harder in a sense. But then I said the other part is that you're trying to control things that are outside of you, when the real the real key to all this is not controlling anything outside of you. It's absolutely going within you to be able to maintain and create balance within self. So you don't have to try to control anything else. And I said a lot of that goes into, because again, like when something happens around you, your mind gets a trigger. The trigger of that trigger has a word to it. That word creates a description in your mind. You start to create a narrative within your mind of what you believe of the situation. And then you start to act in accordance to the conditioned programming in the response, instead of having a calculated, meditative response, right? And I remember telling him, I said, and this is why meditation is important. And I believe that meditation can be achieved and is achieved even through simply breathing. I believe you can achieve a state of meditation and peace in any place at any time. It's just you going within yourself and letting go of everything else, and letting go of needing control of everything. And then once you have, then you can start to hear from yourself the true nature of the situation. And then it will describe not only the true nature of the situation, but it will give you the wisdom to be able to impact that situation with your thoughts, with your vibrational energy, with your words. And so one of the things that, like I said, one of the exercises I do is I do what's called infinity breathing. And infinity breathing is an exercise where you close your eyes, and as you're breathing, sit up straight. You know, you want to go from the crown chakra to the heart chakra to the root chakra. And essentially what you're doing is you're creating a figure eight, like doing that kind of weird, but you're creating essentially a figure eight in your breathing. So when you breathe in, draw your breath down all the way down to your root, bring it all the way back up past your heart chakra, and then all the way up to your crown chakra and back down. And a lot of this, what it's really about is it's about centering yourself and bringing yourself into the moment. And the beauty about bringing yourself into the perpetual state of the eternal now is that within that is where you can hear from yourself the truth of all things. And it's an amazing thing. You know, I told somebody this today. I saw them when I was out working. And they said to me, she said, I was like, hey, how's your day going? She goes, you know, she's going through the motions of having to be at work. And I went back to her later on. I said, hey, you know what's amazing about today? And she said, no, what's that? And I said, that it's never happened in human history. This is the first time that we've ever experienced this. I said, never allow what you think about the task at hand and whatever you create in your mind as far as the words that determine your state of reality right now to take away from the magic and the possibility, the infinite possibility that exists with it. And the reason being is, because it's within that state of infinite possibility for which the true essence of ourself gets expressed through everything that we end up doing. And so I've learned, and I described this to my brother too once. I said, there's two states for which we exist in, and it's crazy because one of them is in a limited state and one of them is in an infinite state. And I said, for most people, the only point for which the infinite state gets expressed is at the point of the expression of an idea, right? And so a person has an idea and then they end up seeing themselves, they talk themselves out of the idea that they have, because immediately following the idea becomes the limited expressions. They start to say things like, oh, I can't do that, or I'm too old, or I'm too this, I'm too that, or I don't have the money, or I don't have this, I don't have that. So immediately at the point for which the infinite possibility creates a realm for them to exist in, they close that realm in with just a word, with just a thought. And a lot of it is based within the construct of fear within itself. And that's why it's so important that a lot of the times when we start to address how we perceive ourselves, we speak to ourselves with words that don't do that, that don't limit us. If you have an idea that comes to your mind, give yourself the expression of unlimited capacity to be able to create that idea after you have the idea, because that's when you stay in the realm of the infinite possibility. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I have not created in me the ability yet to be able to stay in the infinite possibility realm. I'm working on that daily. But I have been able to create a space within me that I'm always at the place of peace, which I believe is always right adjacent to, if not the door that opens up, right? Because peace signifies an openness. And that openness signifies the ability to have the capacity to be able to receive more and grow more. So I truly believe that it's only a matter of time before I'll get to a place of that infinite possibility state being perpetual. But in order to do so, again, I got to keep on feeding that language, that programming, that algorithm over and over and over again into myself. And again, that's the alchemy of self. See, it's like when we talk about this, it's like, with work, like when you work out, right? I've had clients that come to me and they're like, oh, they want to look like this, look like that. And they bring me pictures of a magazine. They say, hey, can you make me look like this? And first of all, I'm like, no, I can't, because you don't have that person's body type, and that's impossible to do. But the other thing is that they come with this false perception that something's going to happen overnight. It's going to be magical. It's just going to be like, bang, it's there. And I'm always like, listen, this is a process. You're going to have to work at this every single day. The crazy part about this is that this is actually harder than that. And the reason being is because we don't even realize that we have the capacity to create change in a single breath. In a single breath. And the amazing part about that is you have over 20,000 breaths within a day. That's 20,000 opportunities to be able to change something within you. So one of the practices that I got into when I said with infinity breathing is this. Because as you start to tune in on your breathing, you will be able to tune in on the language of yourself and the language of life within you. As you start to tune in on that, and again, what we want to do is extrapolate and take away the words that are limited in form, that constrain you. And we want to replace them with things that are unlimited. Right? Saying, like, for a long time, I used to say I was alone about it. And I think that also was one of the things that contributed to my sense of depression, was because I perceived myself in this lonely nature. And then I remembered I had this divine moment where I was swimming in the ocean. And I remembered hearing just this like dialogue in my mind where it said, do you feel separate from the water? You're in the ocean right now. You're swimming in the ocean. Do you feel separate from the water that you're swimming in right now, from the water that's all the way on the other side of the world, connected to that same body of ocean? And my response was, no, I don't feel separate. I feel connected. I feel connected to everything else. And it was amazing because then I realized something, that there was no separation. That was, again, another thing that I had created within my own mental construct through my circumstances, through the abandonment, through the being left as a baby, and through going through foster home. I created the programming. I wrote this programming in me that said that I was separate from everything and I was far away from everything. And all of a sudden, when I did that, now even the stars didn't even feel far from me. Nothing felt far from me because I could feel everything connected to me. I felt connected to the source. And again, because the language that I was using to describe my reality was changing, and the capacity was changing, and then for the atmosphere had to change, everything had to change at that point, because I wasn't constraining anything anymore. I wasn't setting up borders and boundaries and parameters. I was breaking walls down, and I was creating a space for me to exist within a perpetual state of openness to receive, because that's the divineness of life in and of itself, is to receive from life this understanding, to receive from life this intrinsic, hidden, beautiful language that is to describe you as being alive and fervent and full of life and abundant. I mean, it's amazing to think that we think of ourselves as poor, we think of ourselves as impoverished, we think of ourselves in this. But if you look at a person from a physiological nature and perspective, down to the chromosome, down to the cells, down to the very matter that creates them, there are billions upon billions of cells and matter that goes into just this alone. For just this to exist, billions of cells had to exist. So there is no lack. I am life of abundance. I am a universe of abundance. But again, that's because that's my language of self. And it's not because it's not true, because science actually dictates and says that, yes, that is true. And actually, so does religion and all forms of spirituality. They all present to us a sense of greater self. But again, then we turn around and we start to do this thing where we break down and we start using language that limits us, that creates a lack of space for openness to grow and to gain that greater understanding. And so, I guess, it's one of the things that I think that's become more important in the process of the alchemy of self was to reconfigure the mental construct around the language of life, and to allow myself the ability to be able to speak life into myself, because it begins right there anyway. It's not someone else. The words weren't going to come from someone else. My understanding of love was not going to come through having a relationship with any man or woman. My understanding of love was going to come through understanding that I am love. I am an abundancy of love. And therefore, no person has to affirm in me the love that I come to understand about myself. I have to affirm in myself the love I come to understand about myself. And It needs to be enough. You know, the value of the words you use to describe yourself need to be more than enough. You can't keep talking to yourself in a way where you think yourself in a limit and then expect to see yourself go beyond those limits, because it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. Because why? Because again, it's like any other algorithm. Once you continue to write that in and you keep writing that program in, that programming, that coding takes root and takes shape and takes form, and then it recreates you. But that's the beauty of this, that we all have the opportunity, and on a daily basis, not only in the conversations that we have in ourselves in silence and in meditation and in prayer, but also in the conversations that we have with those that we love and we care for, people we deal with on a regular basis. We all have the ability to be able to speak life and to speak love into each other. And in fact, that once we lead with the love language, once we lead with the language of life, that we then create an atmosphere around us that follows us everywhere we go. And we are light at that point. We are love at that point. And then compassion follows, empathy follows, understanding follows, nurturement follows, peace follows, happiness follows. And all of these things we also have to understand. They're not separate from us. They're intrinsic to us. They are the nature of us. Your love is your love. Your joy is your joy. Your peace is your peace. Your happiness is your happiness. All of those things are already in you and are in the essence of you. So you don't need anybody to speak that into you. You need to speak that into you. You need to realize that there comes a time within you where you have to use the wisdom and the knowledge of self to be able to lift yourself to a higher state. Because again, and especially because once you understand what language is and understand the capacity that language has and the ability that language has, then you start to see that we can recreate and redesign all of this, every bit of it, simply by leading from within ourselves, within the divine source of self, with the language of life, and recreating our own narrative and our own expressions and our own thoughts and our own words. Excuse me. Let me take a quick little drink. Anybody have any questions? I feel like I'm going on now. Is anybody out there? It's more of a question. And then it's funny because I'm watching this, and then I have the YouTube going on at the same time, and it's in delay, so like it shows everything later. Well, I don't see any questions for anybody. I can go on and say one of the other things that I put into practice that I use a lot, and especially when I'm working with clients, telling them, when you're building up this first part of this, right? When you're first starting to address the language of self, like one of the first things you have to do is to remove, this idea that something was supposed to happen at a time sooner than it actually did. Right? Like, there's so many times I've heard people say, man, I really wish I would have known this back then. I really wish I would have heard this back then. I really wish somebody would have told me this back then. And here's the thing. Everything is as it should be. There is nothing that changes the now at all. Like, you are sitting here watching this right here, right now, because this is the now. And this now is perfect as it is. Nothing needs to be changed about it. Right? So right here, right now, you have the ability and the opportunity and the capacity to be able to draw from the now something much more in your experience. But it all is based on and determined upon this language that you've used, that language that is yourself, that language is that inner dialogue, that language of that silent conversation, and recognizing, what is that conversation I'm having with myself? What is that language I use to describe myself, to describe my situation, to describe my circumstances, and to describe my now? And is that language of the nature of creation in and of itself? Because that nature of that language for which you use, that you're going to create one desired or undesired response one way or another, is the various language that is the essence of you. But again, you have that power. You have that ability to be able to change that at any point in time. It's just whether or not you want to start to identify within you, one, the language and words that you use to describe yourself, and your situation, your circumstances, and two, to change those and to start to use language that does create the capacity to be able to have the life that you desire for yourself, the hope, the dreams, all of the things that you want. And again, all of that comes from us speaking to ourselves one way or another. I've watched people talk themselves into a corner where they felt like the whole world was coming down around them and that there was no good and nothing great to come out of their lives. And it was just years of just horrible adversities and struggles and everything else. And I've watched other people who come from the same circumstances be able to change all of it. And you wouldn't even know that they had gone through any of that, because when you speak to them, their language isn't limited. They don't have a victim's mentality. They have a victor's mentality. And that's the thing about a victor. A victor is going to be thankful. It's going to be grateful. And those are two words I think that if you wanted to focus on words where you can implement those words into your life where they could start to have more of an impact, grateful and thankful are huge ones, because they automatically create an atmosphere within you of love. A thankfulness and a gratefulness allows us to say, yes, I'm thankful for what this is. I'm thankful and I'm grateful for the opportunity in this moment and everything that comes with it and all life experiences. I'm thankful for the hardships that I endured. And again, there, you change the narrative of the conversation because you simply changed the wording in the conversation. You're no longer using limited wording. Instead of saying, man, I can't stand, I hate all the stuff that's happened. I'm grateful for everything that's happened. Oh man, I regret all the things that I've done. I'm grateful for the things that I've done, both the good and the bad, because they taught me the capacity for life to become greater. I hate this person or that person. No, I'm grateful for that person. I'm thankful for that person, for whatever that person showed me or taught me, revealed something within me that gave me a greater understanding of self. See, and that's all it is. It's as simple as that. You change the wording. You change the narrative. You change the narrative. You change the construct. If you change the construct, you're not only going to change how your mind thinks, but you're going to change how your body responds to how your mind. Take any of you right now and ask yourselves where you're at, right? Where you are physically, where you are mentally, where you are spiritually. I don't care where you are financially. I don't care where you are in jobs or any of those other things. That's all societal stuff. I mean the intrinsic things, the important things, where you are within yourself. And then ask yourself something. Is the reason I'm here because the narrative that I have created for myself has been consistent with this. I'm here because I've spoken myself to be here many a times over. And therefore, you're not going to change the direction of the programming unless you get in there and you change those words. If you change the heading, you have to reprogram that whole part, because that's the part that's keeping you headed in the same direction. The reason why you keep producing the same result, the reason why you see the same type of relationships, the reason you see the same circumstance, the reason you see this or that, it's because of that. Because you have, in your mind, have created this narrative and this conversation. And the crazy part is most people will wake up like this. They'll get up in the morning and they're already thinking about what bad could happen in the course of their day. I know people who really actually think that the guy who cut them off on the highway or something had somehow set out in his day to get up that morning and plan to find him and then to cut him off. It's like we create this narrative of our lives that has no real love, no real light, no real joy, no real exuberance. It's just an expression of all of the hurt we think we've experienced in our lives and being perpetuated over and over and over again. And that's just not the truth. The truth is you are light, you are love, you are abundant, you are eternal, you are everlasting. You are in the nature of creation in and of itself, and you are a creator. You have the ability and the capacity to be able to not only change your life through the words that you direct through your innermost being and into this realm, but you also have the ability to be able to change other people's lives through those same words. The very nature of the language of life, when expressed through the alchemy of self, is so that it not only impacts self, but it has the capacity to reach out to someone else. I didn't get to this point. I didn't get to this knowledge or this understanding because it was just about me just figuring out who I was and what I am and finding out the true nature of myself.
I got to this place that in hopes that once I was there and maintained it and it became wisdom, and that wisdom then took shape, then it could become something that could be impactful to someone else. See, knowledge is the application of wisdom, and wisdom is the application of understanding. You must first come to an understanding of something before it becomes and takes shape and takes root. Once it takes shape and takes root and you practice it over and over again, you put it into application, then it becomes wisdom. Once that wisdom has been applied on a continuous basis and is now a part of you and is intrinsic to you, then through your actions and how you live, that becomes the knowledge that is given to someone else. So all we're doing is creating a perpetual cycle for us and others throughout time to come into the knowledge of themselves. And that is kind of what I think the beauty of this age, this golden age of discovery, this age of enlightenment really gives us the opportunity to experience, because I believe that we are being drawn into a sphere of higher understanding, higher vibrational energy, and the knowledge of self. And I think, but also with that, we're also going to see a lot of adversity and traverse through a lot of that throughout this period, because we're pushing against the fabric right now. We're beating against the fabric right now, and we're about to come out the other side. So I definitely want to encourage all of you. And if you have any questions whatsoever, oh wait, I do. Appreciate the infinity breathing. Yo, I love the infinity breathing. Infinity breathing is one of my favorite exercises. When did you realize that you needed to switch the way you speak about self, and how quickly did changing the process of positive thinking start affecting your life? So when did I realize I needed to switch the way that I speak about myself? I think I've kind of been coming to this understanding over the last probably 10, 15 years, but it was definitely within this last, 3 or 4 years. I guess, to summarize, it would be my daughter, who some know, my daughter battled with a lot with her health over the last 3 years, and at one point we were going through chemotherapy at UCSF in San Francisco, and me and her recorded this song together called "The Comeback," which is going to be on a project that's coming up. And in that, right after that, that was November of 2017. Right after that, she became really ill. We would spend the next 6 to 7 months with her being sick all the time. I started to fall back into one of the darker depressions I've had of my life, and started really struggling with it. And a lot of it was because I felt like I was failing her as a father. I felt like I failed her because I didn't have the ability to be able to take from her disease, and to take the pain, or to take any of the things that she was going through, that I couldn't take it upon myself. I felt like I failed her because at that point I didn't have a good enough job that provided good enough insurance to be able to cover all the expenses that she had for her health. I felt like I had failed her because I had a failed marriage and relationship with her mother. I felt like I had failed her because I wasn't able to be there for her every single moment of the day of the way I wanted to. And it came through a conversation with someone else where they basically were like, yo, none of that is true, right? And I was just like kind of dumbfounded at that moment, because I was like, I don't. I don't know if it's not true. I feel like it all is true. And they're like, no, man, you created, like, the power of your words. And you of all people you should understand this. Like, this isn't true, Ghost. What are you talking about? Like, I know you, and this isn't true. But yet this was the narrative that I had created for myself. And I started to see something that in doing that, I create self-destructive patterns because I will start to hear that narrative, and I'll play that narrative out to myself so much, then I'll start to create the habits, and the patterns will form because of that, and I would start to self-destruct, and things would start falling around. So it was about 3 years ago, and it was really when I was going through probably one of the hardest things that I've ever been through in my life. And like I said, it was watching my daughter go through chemotherapy and everything else. I had a hard time with really my own realization of myself, and my ability to impact that situation to the fullest for the best. And I guess it didn't change quickly. Like, there was no, overnight with this. it was really more of a process of ascension, and understanding the process of ascension as a whole was not about getting to somebody, someplace, sometime at, at some point, and me trying to rush to get there. But it was coming to an understanding every single moment of the day through the language, right? That because I would continually use this language to redefine my existence. And again, not how I speak to you and I, but how I'm actually would speak to my mind and speak in my mind in silence, because I realized that was the place for where it was all beginning in the first place. That was where I was planting seeds and watching them take shape and root and form. And that's where I was then also learning to reconfigure the habits that get formed around the program that I had formed. And so, it's a continual process, Christian. I can't tell you that there's a quickly, you get to any of this quickly. You just continue to progress in the nature of it as you express the nature of it to yourself on a regular basis. I can't, I have to say that, this is, I gotta put this out there for anybody who is actually listening. Like, this is a practice. The alchemy of self, whether it's addressing the mind, the body, or the spirit, and it's all a practice, right? If we're addressing the body, I practice by going and training every single day. And I do. I train every day, and part of the practice of training is doing the exercises and having my form and doing everything correctly so that I not only don't hurt myself, but I maximize the potential for the exercises to produce the results that I want. So even in that, that's the alchemy of the body, the alchemy of self-body, right? I go through these exercises, I repeat the process, I watch how I do the form, I pay attention to what I'm doing, and then it creates a desired response. And then it gets to the point where my body becomes a reflection of the practice. Well, just in the same as the language of life, which is the first part of the alchemy of self, because it pertains to the spirit and the mind. The reason why this is important to understand is because your spirit absolutely knows exactly what you are at all points, at all time, from the moment you were born and conceived into this world to the moment you ascend out into the next plane of existence. Your spirit never changes. The only thing that changes is your mind and your way you think. That's it. That's why people are so in conflict with themselves, because their spirit is diametrically opposed to the narrative they created for themselves, and therefore the life they created for themselves. So you got to understand this is a practice. All of it is. You're going to be practicing these techniques every single day, from the infinity breathing. That's why I said I led in with the infinity breathing, because the infinity breathing is an exercise that draws you right into the present moment. And you will begin to not only hear and see the words that dictate the reality for which you exist in, but you will also be able to start to perceive the inner workings of your own physical body and identify where maybe there is a harmonic imbalance or something in your body that's not in the right place or not, operating the way it should. But again, that all comes through a practice. And that practice is done on an everyday basis with almost every single individual breath you have. But here's the thing, like anything else in life, you do it enough times, it will take shape, root, and form and become secondary to you. You won't even realize that you're doing it after a while, because it'll become the nature of who you are. But that'll take time, So I can't. And how quickly did the changing that process of positive thinking start affecting your life? I mean, I can say this. Honestly, once I really started to dig deep into this, it was instantaneously started changing my life, because I started changing how I perceive myself. Like the moment I changed how I perceive myself was the moment it changed how I perceive life. That's because the way you perceive yourself is how you perceive life. People, it's amazing, and I think the reason why, we have a different perception on this is because of the media and because of, television and everything else. Like, we're constantly bombarded and force-fed these false images of reality on a regular everyday basis. And those false images of reality become our platform for which we start to develop and or to integrate our own sense of our own reality. And what we do is then we correlate our experiences with other experiences outside that we see that are a part of other forms of reality. And then we start to then say, okay, that must be all of reality, right? Like I heard one person once tell me that, they were from the hood and, from the ghetto and everything, and from some projects. And he was like, in my family, me and my folks, we never even really went all that far away from the projects. Like we always lived, everyone was always right there in the projects, and we never really made it that far out. And I always thought about that. That was such an interesting metaphor, especially when you're talking about people who are coming from poverty, because that was the idea. It was to limit your reality to a box, to a designated parameter, to a set zone. And so that you would never really truly see the ability to be able to go beyond that. And so, yeah, I mean, again, I have to say it immediately started positively affecting my life because I started to um, see that I had the ability to be able to dictate the beauty of my life in all things and in all moments and in all matters, and that nobody else could take that away from me or to change that from me, right? Um, let's see, great answer, and even a better piece of advice came thanks us. Oh, it's all love, man. I love you, bro. And I appreciate that too. Um, Anybody else have any other questions regarding this? I mean, I definitely have a lot to go on with this. Um, one of the other things I definitely say is if you're really, really trying and you're working on this, like, and you really want some extra advice or you want some extra resources on this, you can definitely go on and look online on YouTube and look up anything on like reprogramming the mental construct, reprogramming the mind, and things of that nature. You're going to find some great guys like Joe Despacito or something like that. He's phenomenal. There are a lot of great resources on this, and also, any time that you can really dive into some meditation, I would definitely suggest that if you aren't meditating on a regular basis, and work that into. I once heard it said that if you can't meditate for 20 minutes, then you need to meditate for an hour, or something to that degree. So, which basically means that if you don't think you have the time, then you need to do it even more. And so meditation, I think, is one. There's also another exercise that I created myself that was one that really kind of helped to center me. I use it when I work out. I use it when I'm working. I use it even when I'm, engaging in conversations with other people because it helps me to be centered. And basically, it's as simple as this. You take your fingers and like right by your side. Now you can just be holding them on your side like this, whatnot. And you make a circular motion with your fingers, and you start with the first ones right here, and your pointer and your thumb, and you just make a circular motion. And while you're doing this, you're breathing in. So each circle represents an exhale and an inhale. The first one is all about peace and create in your atmosphere, your environment. Your atmosphere, your environment, your peace is all right here. So this is to remind you, my peace is right here. Nothing has the ability to be able to obstruct my peace, to be able to thwart my peace, to be able to change this environment, because this environment is in here. So I start with that. The second one is, as I'm, again, going through that one, the second one is to remove all distractions. Now I know that there's nothing to distract me from this present moment right now. So I keep myself in the present moment, reminding myself that I am light, I am love, I am greatness being achieved within that moment. Then the third one, once you get to here, this is return to me. Because this is the moment when you say to yourself, okay, now that I've reminded myself that my peace is my own, my joy is my own, my love is my own, and that it creates an environment around me, and that I'm not letting anything distract me within that space, within that environment. Now I've returned to me. Now I've returned to the place where I can hear from my divine self and my divine nature. And again, these are just physical representations, but they help because they're an exercise that help to draw you into the moment and give you an ability to be able to just center yourself in that moment. Now, the fourth one, once you get to the fourth fingers, again, you're just going and making a circular motion around all of them, and you're breathing in and you're breathing out, right? As you do that, once you get to this fourth one, this is begin again, because we don't go anywhere else after that. That's all. So we begin again right here. Once you get to that fourth one, you begin again. I usually come together with some prayer hands, and then I start up again. And again, what that does is it allows me to go back in and listen, hear, right? Because a lot of the times, whenever something happens and we get triggered by something that happens, we respond with that conditioned response instead of responding with a calculated, meditated thought, right? We respond in the moment in haste and like that, because whatever that instance was, it had reminded us of something else that happened at another period, at another time that isn't even happening right now. And a lot of people, when that ends up happening, is they'll keep doing that. You know, like, oh, something bad happened on Tuesday. It's Saturday, you know. but because that's the narrative of self. The narrative of self is a victimhood. The narrative of self complains. The narrative of self murmurs. The narrative of self that has a down expression at all times. There's something always wrong, because that's the narrative of self. It doesn't matter if it happened 10 years ago or if it happened 10 days ago. That's still going to be the expression of that individual, because they are operating within that space of what that circumstance created, and that's where they exist. And for a lot of people, what ends up happening is you don't even get out of it. You stay in that space. You can stay in that space for the whole of your existence. But because, you know, like I said, what I chose to do, what I've been choosing to do with my life, was to recreate that through examining the language that I was using that was creating this mental construct. You know, and again, like, think of your mind as a superpower computer, right? And you have the ability to sit there at a keyboard and type in the coding and put in the algorithms and all of the things that you want to create the capacity to maximize the ability for that supercomputer. My true belief is that at some point in time, if we continue on this process of evolution where we utilize harmonic energy and language and intent and soul and everything else, that at some point in time, we will be able to move things with the frequencies and the vibrations of our being. And I also believe that probably at some point in time in our history, we already had this capacity to be able to move things vibrationally with our energy, with our words and other things, but we lost it because we lost the knowledge of self. And because we've been indoctrinated for at least 3,000 plus years into a limited form of understanding, where we were separate, broken, sinful, and all these other things, when in reality, if we were of anything, right, if we're created of anything other than just this, then that meant that we were of much more, and that we weren't separate either. You know, we were tethered to the creator in and of itself, and the creator essence. And so, again, that's why it's important. Like, if you're looking for an overnight solution, you're not going to find it. But what you will find here is the program. You'll find the ability to be able to get the blueprint and to start to work the blueprint and integrate the blueprint in to your daily life, and then start to see the changes occur. But again, the changes don't occur outside first. Changes occur inside first. Any change that comes from outside of us is simply a manifestation of the work that was created within us. Like, I tell my client that, like, know you're always seeing the older version of me, because the skin in of itself is the largest organ on the human body, but it actually only makes up 16% of the actual body weight. And it is the result of the dying cells that go through the body and then it rise up on the skin. So once you see the skin is merely the representation of the old self shedding off itself, right? So what I tell my clients is whatever you invest into yourself, then later on becomes the representation of self. So when I speak to myself and I really started to utilize words that were going to empower me, uplift me, and be able to set me on a different direction altogether, it was, and like I said, I mean, instantly I started noticing change, but it was in that repeating of doing those things where I now started to see that my approach towards things started to change. Where I used to address things of one nature, I was now starting to address them in a completely different nature. And I think that's when I realized that the work was really taking root and taking shape and it took form. Because when I then got posed with circumstances or situations that reflect things of the nature of things I'd been through when I was younger or whatever, trauma or anything else, and then I didn't actually react the same way as I did before, then I realized I had rewrote the program. You know, that's the thing, is once you know when you go into an experience where you've been in that experience before, you've been in something similar like that before, but you start responding differently, that's when you know that the program's taking shape. So yeah. Any other questions or comments or thoughts? I don't know who all's out there, but hey, again, if you're just joining or if you've been with us for a minute, this is I'm Old Ghost. This is Alchemy of Self and part one series of Language of Life with Auburn Hip Hop Congress. I'm definitely blessed and feel honored to be on here with you all and being able to share this insight and this wisdom. Um, but yeah, I don't know if anybody else, Rocky wants to jump in and ask anything. You know, anybody wants to throw anything in there, feel free to. Um, this is the part I always, I think, you know, it's not that I fear this happening, but this is when you get that you start running through this narrative in your mind, like, oh, is anybody even out there, or am I just talking to myself? But again, if I'm going to reprogram that and to reshape that with my words, what I would say is that I will be continuing to send out this message and putting out these words and speaking life into people with hopes with whoever's listening that it will be a blessing and an impact onto them. The real things, old goes for dropping truths. Hey, what up, Hector? Here's a person who I can honestly say too. Like we've worked on this, for a long time, and he's actually somebody who's fully aware of a lot of this work that I've been doing. And especially in this realm, and it's something that me and him talk about a lot. So props to you, Hector. Much love, man. I hope we can start training again soon. And for anybody in the San Bruno area or in the San Francisco area looking to either train or wanting to take classes, I teach classes at Fitness 19. Now that we're getting through the pandemic and we've lifted some of the COVID protocol restrictions, I'm able to get back to doing some of that work too, as well as I do mentoring, I do life coaching, and this right here, reconstruction of the mental construct and reprogramming of the mental construct through the language of life and self-realization, self-actualization. And so, a lot of this it's available to anybody. If you want to talk, we can build. You can find me on IG at OGXIC Clothing. You can find me on Facebook, Aguye X Bana, Aguye Bana X Abdui. I don't know if maybe Rocky could throw a couple of those up there. There we go. Yeah, IG, OGXIC Clothing. And yeah, so again, like we have, if you have any questions, you have any thoughts whatsoever, go ahead and throw anything out right now. If not, then maybe Rocky jumps in, we'll figure out some more stuff here and keep this going for a minute. But again, I would like to just offer this up for all of you that if this is something that is of interest to you, if it's something you deal with, and I mean this truly because it's something I've seen and I've dealt with throughout my life. Hold on, I thought I saw something. Okay. When you're dealing with depression, when you're dealing with anxiety, when you're dealing with suicidal thoughts, when you're dealing with addictions, when you're dealing with all of these things, it all comes down to that we have created within ourselves this language, this language that through a string of words and through these sentences and paragraphs created this narrative within ourselves that became a block, a literal block, a mental block that kept it almost as if it was keeping one frequency from reaching another. And that frequency is the frequency of the true nature of self, the core individual being, our true essence. Our true essence is always speaking in us and through us and is desiring to be able to take us and elevate us to a state of higher place of understanding our true nature. But the problem is that and again, it's like I was telling you about when you get an inspiration for something and there's these 2 points for which everyone exists in. Now, most people only exist in the first point, which is the fear and the doubt. Right? So they have an idea, and as soon as the idea happens, that in the space of when the idea happens again, that's the place that we call infinite possibilities. That's the state where we want to find ourselves at more and more and more. Because when you have an idea, you don't immediately come up with how limited you are to being able to accomplish that. In fact, what ends up happening the moment you have that idea at its conception and birth, you have a sense of elation and joy because your body is responding to the idea of you being something more and doing something more and being far greater. So your body actually has a response to it, and there's a sense of joy and elation that comes with it. But then something else happens immediately after, which is the fear and doubt portion that most people are victim to, because they, through their programming, believe that they don't have the capacity to be able to achieve the very idea for which they had in that state. But that's the point. You couldn't have that idea if you couldn't get to that state. If you can't get to that state, couldn't get to that state, then it couldn't be real. So obviously, if you can get to that state, it can be real. If you can have that idea, it can be real. The thing that you have to remove, which is the blockage, is the fear and the doubt aspect, which creates the language that then dictates whether or not you will take the initiative to see that idea through. So let's just base the idea then in you becoming you, the true image of yourself, becoming greater. Let's base this idea right now. And this is the exercise that I'll leave you all with, and the thing that I say, that I'll end this on. And that you guys can take away until our next time that we get together and we talk about this, which is, imagine right now that infinite possibility idea is you, the true you, finding you, realizing you, seeing you, understanding you, loving you, being you, all of you, the beauty of you. So spend time over this, period, whenever, we meet again, or, just from this point on, even if we never do this again, right? Spend time in today and in tomorrow and in the days to come. Spend time imagining the infinite possibility of you when you remove all the blockage, when you remove all the words that limited your form for so long. Spend time in that place of utilizing verbiage and language within your meditative state that brings you to a collective understanding of the true nature of yourself and draws out the true nature of you. So if that's it, and nobody else got anything else, I guess it's been what, an hour and 20 minutes. It's nice talking through this. This is actually my first time doing this portion of this. What I do on my IG page is I do what's called Soul Talks, which will kind of delve into a host of everything from relationships, finances, health, wellness, and also this mental reconstruction and everything. I also do some consulting on health and wellness. If you're interested in finding out anything about natural herbs and holistic approaches to your health and or to personal training, you can again find me on IG. You can reach out to me there, DM me there, and we can set something up and go from there. I know that I will be returning soon, and the next chapter in all of this will be, we're going to go kind of further the process of the reprogramming aspect of it. I mean, I kind of got into some of it today, and I gave you guys a couple of exercises, but there's other things that I would love to be able to share that go into the reprogramming aspects, and also getting into things like DNA activation, which, and also boosting your immune system and other things of that nature. So when I say, and there's scientific evidence that backs all of this stuff up, but when I say that we have the power within us to be able to reconfigure ourselves, even on a molecular level and a cellular level, through our thoughts and through our words and through the vibrational tones and energies that we create in ourselves, it's 100%. It's 100%. I am a struggling asthmatic, or was a struggling asthmatic, I should say. Again, and that's another thing too, is and actually I should dive a little into that before we, the misappropriation of labels for which we use that determine what we think we are and what we think we are, right? And again, this goes back to all we've been talking about, and this is another exercise that you can do too on your own, when you have time to meditate on these things, and which is just to say, what are the labels that I use that I associate with my being? And you hear people say things like, oh, they'll say their zodiac signs, or they'll tell, oh, I'm the father, I'm a daughter, I'm a son, or I'm this, oh, I'm an electrician, or I'm that, like, yo, I'm not a personal trainer. I'm not, a guru. I'm not a self-help person. I'm not a coach. I'm not this. I'm not that. I am an infinite being, a divine intelligence inhabiting a physical form, having a human experience on this earthly plane and learning from it. And with the process, with the hopes and the understanding that as I gain more knowledge and wisdom, I will ascend into the process of ascension in the direction for which I intended at all points. So, like, I'm not the labels that this world has given me. I'm not a black man. I'm not a brown man. I remember telling somebody once, I was talking to my daughter about this, where I said, when somebody called, when she was like, how did it feel when people would call you a nigger to your face? And I said, back then it was like really hard. Like, I struggled with that idea because I had the label of racism associated with my identity, meaning that like I felt validated in my existence through going through being called a nigger by people or going through like racial injustice or all these other things. Like I felt like there was some type of validity in my soul from having to endure those things, and that I somehow gave more identity to me. And the reality is that wasn't my identity either. I fought a lot of social injustices. I've marched on the front lines and been there for everything from police brutality and shootings and stop the violence to, like I said, I ran a school for 7 years teaching early childhood education to 1.5 to 5-year-olds. And in the process of doing all of these things, I learned that I wasn't any of those things. And I was all of those things all at the same time. But they just were aspects of the expression of my soul. So like when I do my music, it's an aspect of the expression of a part of my soul. When we do this right here, this becomes an aspect of the expression of a part of my soul. When I am spending time with my daughter, it becomes an aspect of the expression, and so on and so on and so on. So all of these things just become the expression. And again, an expression is words. An expression is a narrative. An expression is a thought with a direction. So what will be the expression that you will use to define yourself going forward from here? I hope this is blessed. I hope that this is enlightened. I hope that this is imparted. I hope that this has been something useful for any of you out there listening right now. Like I said, you can find me on IG. We can reach out. We will be doing this again. This is just part one of what I'm hoping to be a 3-part series. And we will continue to move in this direction as we go through the process of ascension, as we go through the process of relearning self, as we go through the process of learning the true expression of ourselves. I am, again, blessed and honored to have had this experience with you. I'm looking to grow this with you, and I look forward to the next opportunity to be able to do so. With that being said, if anybody else has any other questions for me, and it can go into anything, you want to ask me anything whatsoever, please feel free to. I will answer questions for a few more minutes, and maybe Rocky jumps back in. I don't know. I don't know how this whole part of it works. But again, I thank you guys for the opportunity to be able to work with you on this. This is The Language of Life, The Alchemy of Self. I'm Old Ghost, OG. What up, Rocky?
Yeah. What up, Ghost? Beautiful, beautiful broadcast, bro. I really appreciate you coming on today. I'm excited about the next 2 parts. I started to write part 2, 2-part series, but it sounds like it's a 3-part series. So I'm really excited to hear more about it and to, be able to offer this. This has been a beautiful hour for the, 10 or a few handfuls of people that did tune in. I think they all really enjoyed it from the feedback we were getting. But I hope more people tune in and continue to tune in. And I just want to let everyone know that this can be watched after the fact and it can be shared from YouTube or Facebook. So thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you, Ghost, for joining us. It was a beautiful broadcast. Again, this topic is very close to my heart. We've had some of the deepest conversations around these things, Ghost, and you are an inspiration to me, and you live by the words that you say, unlike many, that, we can have this conversation, myself included, and it not be as grounded, as in tune as you are. I know you practice this on a daily. So I really appreciate your time and, just touching home with everybody tonight. Thank you.
I appreciate you, brother. Love you, man. Again, thank you guys for the opportunity. Thank Natalie for me, of course, and I'll definitely send my love out to her as well. I think that, it's through these conversations that we are able to collectively come to a greater understanding with one another of not only ourselves, but our relationship with one another, and how through our relationships with one another, we have the ability to create the change that we really desire. And that change comes from a deep understanding of that love. you know, that pure essence of unflinching, unrelenting, unconditional love that we give from one another for one another. And that in and of itself is that language, you know, that's the language of life right there. So, you know, again, having these opportunities, have these conversations, have these dialogues, iron sharpens iron, man. We build one another through these things, and we build our community through these things. But it's also, it's time. It's time for us to change the conversations, to change the tone of conversations, and to start having some real soul connecting conversations that remind us of our true nature and our true being, and beyond the constraints of a lot of things that have been created to limit that. You know, this is the beauty of things like this is that we're in an open space, and it feels that way, you know, because you become more open to the expression of yourself. So again, man, nothing but the most the purest of love for you and your wife, man, and the fam, for you guys' organization, everything you guys have done over the years. I've always appreciated being a part of everything that you guys have done. I will always hold dear in my heart my first memory of you in front of one of the stages when we were rocking out with your camera out, and you were fresh out of juvie not that long before and getting your life together, and me and you had a conversation that I think kind of set the tone for the remainder of our now almost 20-year relationship. You know, so
you know, on
yeah,
that
man,
note, I hope to bring this conversation into the juvenile hall, and also just imagine getting this information younger, you know, and I hope to leave the audience thinking about this, because maybe it starts a conversation in your home or, you know, in your circles. But imagine getting this information younger and starting to practice it in a way where it doesn't feel like you're doing something so foreign or you have to do it a certain way entirely. You give yourself that breath to be able to learn and grow. Like you said, we're still learning. You're still practicing these principles on a daily, and you have to remind yourself, even in conversation, those mind corrections that we make, you know what I mean? Like, it still happens daily for me where I'm saying something, I catch myself saying it a certain way, and then I pull it back and I say it how I want it, how I want it to vibrate, you know? So thank you for a way of putting that into words, Ghost, that I feel like was received by anybody that tuned in today. Thank you.
Yeah, and I feel you, man. I think, you know, we've talked about this before, and we've had opportunities before when working in the juvenile correction centers. It's always interesting. I know I'm a different breed, and when I come in, it changes the format a little bit, and I have a different way of approaching things. But you know, it's a blessing and it's an honor. But I definitely, you know, that is the aim of all of this, is to be able to get in and work with youth and work with children on these concepts, because people like you and I understand greatly what it means to have that impact at that age. And I can't go back and rewrite any of my existence no more than you can. You know, and I'll get into that in part 2, one of the series. I'll give you guys a little sneak peek, is what we're going to delve into is the future is the imagination, and the memories, or the past, are your memories. And the only state that ever really truly exists is now. And we'll talk more about that later on. But, you know, pertaining to working with kids, like, I think being able to draw children into the present moment and seeing the capacity of an unlimited amount of potential for themselves, and changing the language within them, that then it gives them that sense of the entitlement. Now, and then, see, this is one of those few times where I can say that using the word like entitlement actually is appropriate, because you are entitled to come to know the greater aspect of yourself, right? You know, you are entitled. You're entitled to everything that comes along with it. You're just not entitled to anything that has to do with anyone else in that regard. You know,
anyone else, exactly.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with you or anyone else. It just has to do with you in that matter. And so, you know, giving children that power of the knowledge of self, because again, knowledge is the application of wisdom. Wisdom is the application of understanding. Once you have handed to somebody the keys to unlocking the understanding within their own mental construct, then you change the direction inevitably for that individual, because they see the potential in every moment, in everything that they do. And I think that's why, you know, especially with children and with youth, it's of the utmost importance that we start to help them to develop a greater power of their own self-narrative and their own language of life. Yeah.
Word. Sorry, I was looking for my light so I could get on your level.
Yeah. You know, I've got a stage. This is a stage set, you know.
I'll be set up to join you next time. You caught me off guard.
Yeah. This one's for rent. You know, we got this for rent. I got other backdrops back here too. That's
Hey,
it.
whether it becomes part of the third episode or we have to go even further, you know, the art of freestyle and how that relates to all this, I would love to go there with you, because you're somebody that definitely you know, I think when you hit a stage and you hit those notes, hit those levels, it's like people know you've gone to a spiritual place with your freestyles, and that's what it is for me. So I don't want to like go into the whole conversation right now, but let's think about that.
But to add to that, though, I will say this, though. You know, there was a conversation I had with somebody once, and that even in the conversation I was speaking to them, they actually thought I was freestyling. And I told them, I said, you know what, though? The truth is if I have ever really truly come to a point of mastering, then it absolutely should be that. And that is an important thing to recognize, because one, language is one of the most essential aspects of creation in this world. You know, how we speak, how we create within ourselves an intended response through the words that we speak, and what we choose to do with those things. It's amazing to me that people don't understand this concept. They don't grasp this concept as much. So even when I think about freestyling and things of that nature, I'm always trying to go to a space within me where I'm speaking from the most purest and truest state. Like I had an incident not that long ago where I've been dealing with some stuff with this company that I've been working with for a really long time, for a while now. And after a series of events that happened with them and a lot of mistreatments, and a lot of it went into, you know, I had people calling me stupid at my work. I had, you know, supervisors telling me to shut up and call me a liar, you know, all this other stuff. And just like a lot of unprofessional misconduct and treatment by people at this place. Now I realized it was part of the culture of this place. This is how they talk to one another. This is how they dealt with each other and everything else. I didn't get down like that. But I also realized that in the process of allowing these people to do this, I was allowing people to devalue me and to speak a lower form of valuation of my person to me. And, you know, and I remember saying something to somebody once, when pertaining to this, I said, you know, in truth, if I were to stay there and to continue with that job, that meant I was accepting the valuation that they gave me and their treatment and everything else. And that meant that I was accepting their version of their reality of me and not accepting my version of my reality of me. And so, you know, and especially I think, you know, when it comes to music, like that was one of the biggest things that held me and kept me from really putting out music for a long time, is because I saw and I had taken a personal evaluation of myself, and I said, you know, I didn't want to speak words that weren't, one, absolutely true to the nature of my being, and then two, were not absolutely true to the nature of another person's being too, and didn't have the ability to be able to speak to the nature of that person. And I didn't want to manipulate, you know, people with my gifts or my abilities or my skills. I wanted the essence of my writing to be the purest essence of my being. And so, like, it's interesting, even when I, you know, talk to people about like freestyling and things of that nature, I said I still have to go to a space within me to kind of present that. And so go back to that story, like I was talking to these people from this work, and the first thing we got onto some meetings with the HR, and you know, we were having these discussions. And the first thing I said when they finally came to me, I said, listen, you know, let me take this moment right now to set my intentions so that whatever I speak will not be only of a benefit to myself, but also a benefit to anyone else who would be hearing it. And that I would not use my words to manipulate or to try to win over, but that I would use these words that they would have the impact that they were intended to have. So, you know, it's like, yeah, I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, freestyles and writing expressions and things of that nature, and even, you know, teaching on those things, it's really important that we get to a place of like expressing to people at the same time. It's like, yeah, you know, I want my approach to come from the most pure state of me at all times. So yeah. Did somebody else have it? I thought I saw something else. This is really cool. I feel like a nerd. Because it's like I've never done any of this stuff before. But this is really cool. Um, but yeah, again, thank you, Rocky, for having me on. I look forward to the next one. Like I said, the next series, I think will probably be in a couple weeks or something like that. We'll check in with you, Rocky, and we'll get the date on that. But we're definitely going to go more in and delve in a lot more to the actual programming aspects, and also um, to what I was discussing a minute ago, which is that the three states for which a being exists. One of the states is, past memory. The other state being imagination in the future, and the other state being the perpetual now. So, and the power of being in the perpetual now with the right thinking, and how that can then take shape and hold, and you can start diving into what we'll then get into, which will be in the third series, which will be DNA activation, astral projection, speaking and manifestations into your life, and all the things of that nature, which is fun stuff and great stuff to learn again. So thank you again, Rocky. So part 1 through 3 series. I look like grandpa, like, I can't see the little writing. Nice. All right. Well, again, I thank you guys all for coming in, for tuning in and watching. This was part 1 of the Alchemy of Self, Language of Life. If you have any other questions with any of this, I would love to connect with you guys. Again, you can connect with me on IG, OGXIC Clothing. You can also email me at ogxicclothing@gmail.com. I do respond to all forms of DMs and emails accordingly and promptly as I can. If you have any questions about, again, anything pertaining to health, pertaining to physical fitness or anything of that nature, feel free to ask me about that. If you're looking for somebody for a life coach or somebody for help with mental reconditioning, again, all my information is there. Rocky, thank you again for having me. Natalie, all my best and love to all you guys. Before I sign off, I would just like to say peace, love, and infinite blessings to you all. I pray that this has been a true blessing for you. I also pray that as you come into the knowledge of self, that you see that you have the capacity to be able to speak life into others as well, and that we are a part of something far greater that spans the course of all known life, not just time, not just here on this planet, but we are infinite beings of the divine source, and we are enabled with the gifts of the divine source, and we are creators. So therefore, we have the capacity to create all that we desire. And let's create a beautiful new life together in a new world together. Peace, love, infinite blessings.